In a seminal case decided in the year 1979, the Supreme Court in the Bishwanath Prasad Radheshyam case dealt with the concept of obviousness. The test for obviousness was laid down by the Supreme Court in the following words: whether the alleged discovery lies so much out of the track of what was known before as not naturally to suggest itself to a person thinking on the subject. It must not be the obvious or the natural suggestion of what was previously known. In this test laid down by the Supreme Court, you would find reference to several concepts that we have already discussed. For instance, the person thinking on the subject is a person skilled in the art. The term previously known refers to existing knowledge. The concept of lying out of the track of what was known before, or a natural suggestion in view of the existing knowledge, is what the Supreme Court conceptualizes as non-obviousness. These qualities make a patented invention non-obvious. Let us look at some more concepts. Another concept that you would find in patent law is that of hindsight bias. This is a very important concept and one which patentees often rely in patent litigation. What happens, and this is a natural human tendency, is that once an invention or once a solution has been arrived at, it always seems obvious. We tend to believe that most solutions once arrived at could have been done by anyone if they applied their mind to it. That is why there is a hindsight bias. As they say, hindsight is always 20/20. That is why, in order to avoid a situation where a patent is denied owing to this hindsight bias, which is now a recognized cognitive effect in human beings, that is why an invention which might seem obvious after the fact could still have been very inventive at the time when the patentee was working on that problem before the solution came into being. In order to avoid an hindsight bias, the courts have developed the Goodwood test. What is the Goodwood test? The Goodwood test is that to determine whether a patented invention is obvious or not, it is necessary to find out whether a person working on that particular problem would have reached the solution, not whether it could have reached the solution. That is, it must be very obvious, as the Supreme Court says, it must lie within the track, it must be the most natural suggestion when someone is working on that problem. That is when a solution is considered to be obvious under patent law. Another concept that you would find in patent law is teaching away. Quite often, existing knowledge creates prejudices in the minds of the person skilled in the art. Let us say I am working on a particular problem, but the prior art reference tells me not to try out a particular solution. It says that a prior person has already worked on a particular solution and it seemed not to work for him. This would not incentivize a person skilled in the art who is working on the same problem to try out that solution. Patent law rewards such people who, despite such prejudices, try out these solutions and make them successful. This concept is called teaching away, that is, where a prior art taught away from a particular solution and the patentee tried it successfully, then that particular solution should be patented. The test laid down in this regard is there any prejudice in the prior art, and whether a person skilled in the art would be led away from the invention. The next concept that we will discuss today is objective indicia of non-obviousness. As you may recall, we just discussed the concept of hindsight bias. This is a recurring problem in patent law which affects the ability of patentees to be able to justify that their patented invention was non-obvious at the time when they were working on the problem. It might appear obvious at a later point of time once the solution has been arrived at, but at the time when the patentee was working on the problem, it certainly was not obvious. Another method through which the courts have tried to avoid the hindsight bias is by developing some objective criteria for non-obviousness. You would appreciate that these tests for obviousness as to what is obvious, what was the natural suggestion, did something lie in the path of what was already known before, are very subjective. One person might believe that something is obvious, while another person might believe that the same solution is not obvious. Thus the results can vary from even one judge to another. In order to counter this subjective nature of the non-obviousness inquiry, courts have developed certain objective indicia for non-obviousness. What are these objective indicia? These are basically objective criteria through which a patentee can prove that a particular invention is non-obvious. For instance, let us say a particular problem had not been solved for a very long time. That is, there was a long felt need for a solution for a particular problem. This would be an indicator for a judge or for a patent office that probably the solution must have been non-obvious. Had it been obvious, then it would have been discovered before. Then there would not have been a long felt need for that particular solution. This is one objective criteria to determine non-obviousness. A patentee can show that a problem had been discovered 20 years before and several hundred inventors or several thousand inventors. A patentee can show that a particular problem had been discovered 10 years ago and 10 or 15 inventors had worked on that problem, but had not been able to arrive at a solution. But he, through his inventive faculty, was able to arrive at a solution for that problem and show that therefore, the solution must have been non-obvious, since that solution had not been arrived at for a long time and had not been found by many inventors. Another objective indicia for non-obviousness is the cost or the money that has been spent in arriving at that solution. Of course, one has to be careful in not simply accepting the figures that have been supplied by the patentee, and just because a lot of money has been spent on a particular solution cannot mean that it requires a patent. This would create a perverse incentive and people would simply spend a lot of money to get a patent for that particular product. But spending a lot of money does definitely indicate that probably a lot of research and development was required to arrive at that particular solution, and is thus an important criteria for determining non-obviousness. Thirdly, if the patent has been successfully enforced against a lot of infringers, and there are a lot of people who have copied that particular solution, then it also shows that the patented invention was probably non-obvious. For instance, I can show that there are at least 4 to 5 people who have copied the solution against whom the patentee has been able to get an injunction. The fact that the solution was a popular one also is an indicator that the invention is non-obvious. Another objective indicator of non-obviousness is commercial success. That is, if a solution has been hugely commercially successful in the market, that would also be an indicator towards its non-obviousness. These objective indicators of non-obviousness have been dealt with differently in different jurisdictions, and different weight is given to these objective indicia of non-obviousness. Some jurisdictions like the USA have called these objective indicators as secondary factors, that is, the primary factor is the preliminary analysis of whether something is obvious or not, and these secondary factors can only at best be given weight if the judge is not able to arrive at a conclusion after conducting the primary analysis as to whether a patented invention is obvious or not. Let us do a case study on the obviousness analysis. You will recall that we had considered the example of a chair, I will go back to the claim for your ready reference. The claim was a device for resting comprising of a seating platform, 4 legs, a backrest and an armrest. We had identified the 5 elements which you see in this slide. The prior art which we had discussed earlier was a similar chair, but without an armrest. Now, let us say you also find another chair which does not have a backrest, but has an armrest. You would see that none of the 2 prior art references, that is the chair without an armrest or the chair without the backrest, can be considered as novelty destroying prior art references. But the question would then arise whether you can combine these 2 references to arrive at the chair. That is, if a person skilled in the art read the reference relating to the chair without the armrest, and then he read the reference of the chair or the stool with only an armrest, but without the backrest, would he have combined the 2? Would it have been obvious for him to combine the 2 references? And after reading these 2 references, would it have been obvious for him to combine the teachings of these 2 references and come up with the chair that we have claimed in this invention? This question, as I said, is a subjective one. Some of you might think this is very obvious, and others of you might believe that the hindsight, if you ignore the hindsight bias, maybe it would not have been so obvious to combine these 2 references and reach the claimed invention. This would probably also help you understand the subjective nature of the obviousness test.